So I'm going to start this off with what I think is sort of the most pressing health news of this week, which would be the issue of the children coming across the U.S. border being separated from their parents. It's a policy that was implemented by the Trump administration. You work for the Trump administration. What do you say about the health implications of what has been happening at the border?
Starting off with a softball, huh, Allison? Well, first of all, it's important that everyone knows that I don't have any direct authority or decision-making over what's going on down there, and that I am not speaking on behalf of the administration, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. You talked about the HIV outbreak in Indiana, and there are similarities here in an interesting way. Public policy is complicated, and folks always say to me, we want you to lead with the science. But the reality is, the science is one part of a multivariate equation that equates to public policy. I want every decision to be informed by the science, but we also have to do a good job of listening. And how does that relate to the question you're asking? Well, we know that children not being around their parents is a bad thing. We know that it can lead to negative health outcomes. Science tells us that. But when you look at what's going on at the border, what the president, in my opinion, again, I'm not speaking for him, is trying to do is thread a delicate needle of governing with heart, but also trying to enforce the rule of law. And I'll give you a real story here because we can talk in theoreticals, but we both live in the Northern Virginia, Maryland area. Do you remember the case just about a year ago when there was a young lady in school who was killed by MS-13 by someone who came into our country through a similar pathway? And if I go to a meeting and the mother of that daughter is in the crowd and she says, why aren't you doing everything you can as a representative of this administration to enforce the rule of law? My daughter would be alive today if you had. I've got to be able to answer that question. The president's got to be able to answer that question. And it's a difficult balancing act. I think you saw through his executive order how much it's pained him, and he's still trying to, as the First Lady said, govern with heart, but also enforce the rule of law and do what the people of the United States elected him to do. But as Surgeon General, again, I'm focused on making sure folks know the science so that it can be part of that equation, but it doesn't mean that the science automatically ends up in a decision that goes the way that we want. Because again, that mother may say it's bad for health for us not to enforce the rule of law. When you talk about adverse childhood experiences, unfortunately, we're hearing horrific stories about people being brought across the border by smugglers. What's the adverse childhood experience of a child being taken away from their home in their native country, coming across a border, and then being sent back home again, or being sexually assaulted in the process? We've got to balance all those things and try to come up with a policy that harms the fewest number of people. And I put it that way instead of saying helping the most, because again, we'd love it if we could come up with public policy that hurts no one. But that's not the world we live in. And I'm going to continue to focus on leading with the science and trying to mitigate harm wherever I can. I said I don't have any authority. One thing I do have authority over, talking about adverse childhood experiences or an ability to impact, are the person dying every 12 and a half minutes from an opioid overdose in our country. There are children, dozens of children every day, who are losing their parents, who are being ripped away from their parents because of the opioid epidemic. And that's definitely an adverse childhood experience, to go in and find your parent dead on a bathroom floor, to know that you're never going to have them. And so as Surgeon General, I am focusing my energy, based on the tools that I have, on helping folks understand the severity of the opioid epidemic and the steps that any one of us can and should be taking to help mitigate that opioid epidemic and to try to keep those families together. And that's the most honest answer I can give you on this situation, Allison.